Hello everyone, Dr. Shabazz here, and I'm going to shoot a video giving you kind of an overview about the presentations and what my expectations are. I have uploaded a number of documents for your convenience, but I'd like to say a few things about the project itself going forward so that you can have a clear understanding of what I'm looking for when you present on this coming week. As you all remember, one of the first things we did in this class was a case on PepsiCo marketing Cheetos into China. And so what you had was this article, and this article was is a rather old article now, but this is when Cheetos did not exist in China. And so what PepsiCo did is they did some research. They tested the water, so to speak. They looked at market size. They looked at per capita income. They looked at possible partnerships. They went in and they did some focus groups. They got 600 flavors. They tested the flavors. They chose some flavors. They did some work on the packaging. And they came up with a phonetically similar name to Cheetos. I don't know how long this process took, but it was a very expensive process. This is what you call R&D, research and development. And to this day, this company, PepsiCo, has a very successful product in China. So this is exactly what we're doing, minus the fact that we don't have the resources that this multi-million-dollar company has. I do realize that. So what I want you to do is to be as realistic as possible in terms of finding a niche in your country for a product that will be successful. You're not a humanitarian organization. You're not trying to cure any disease. You are essentially trying to take a product into another market. And so a couple of months ago, February 7th, as you can see, the assignment that I gave, and I mentioned here in the preliminary research, you don't choose a product at that time. One of the things that I found, unfortunately, was that none of the groups submitted a preliminary draft. Now, it was optional for you to do so, but it makes the job a lot easier because what it does is it gives you an orientation to the information about your country, the political environment, the legal, the economic, financial, etc., all the uncontrollables that we talked about during this class. So once you have that information and you have understood some of the needs and the wants in that country by looking at current events, then it's much easier for you to decide on what to choose as a product for market entry. I found that a lot of groups had problems choosing a product because much of the groundwork had not been done at that time, and a lot of ideas were being tossed around, but that's a very inefficient way to go about that process. When you go forth in your career, you will work on projects. Some of you will be project managers. You will lead groups, and you will have certain directives. And you will demand that there be a certain process to the actual task that you're accomplishing. So you want to make sure going forward in any other class you have or any other project you have at work, you want to make sure you follow a process, specifically when it has to do with research. Research is very procedure oriented, and you have to ensure that you follow the proper steps so that you can get the kind of information that you're looking for. All right, so your groups have chosen products, hopefully. And what you're going to do in the coming week is you're going to give us an idea of your country, a little background, not too much. You're going to give us some ideas of why you chose this particular product, how you identified the need potential. Where is the expressed demand, and how did you determine that there was an expressed demand for the product? That means that you possibly could have read an article about a trend. You could have noted a population trend, a fashion trend, a dietary trend, or something that gave you an idea that this would indeed be a market. Now, sometimes you have countries that do not have certain products. And the idea may be, well, let's market this because they don't have it. Well, there's also a reason why they may not have it. There might be some restrictions, there might be a cultural barrier, there might be all other kinds of issues that you have to consider. So if you have those situations, make sure you look at the demand conditions, and you look at whether there is an express demand for your product, and you can give a rationale for why you're going in. The team dynamics. Everyone in this class is to function as part of a group. I know you dread group projects, and when I was in undergrad, I wasn't a fan of group projects either. But in your life, you're always going to be working in groups. Some of them will be functional, some of them will be dysfunctional. Sometimes your peers will mess up, sometimes you will mess up. Don't believe that you have a handle on group dynamics, because sometimes we get into situations where we make mistakes and we may not do things as we are capable of doing. But for this group, make sure that you're pulling your weight. I'll just say it like that. Make sure you're pulling your weight, because when the peer assessments are filled out, and on a 50-point scale, there are 5 attributes that I am looking for as a criteria. Those 5 attributes are cooperation, reliability, promptness, contribution, and team spirit. So your peers will be judging you on those 5 factors from 0 to 10. So make sure that you have been pulling your weight, so that you don't have to come to me appealing or looking for an appeal because you got a low peer assessment score. There will be 3 grades in this project. There will be a paper, the samples that I have shown you, well, not samples, but past projects. There will be a presentation. You will have a PowerPoint PowerPoint slides that you will present to the class, and then you will have the peer assessment. The paper is half of your project grade, the peer is 25%, and the presentation is 25%. So there are 3 grades, and then your project grade will make up 20% of your overall grade. So it's pretty comprehensive, and conceivably everybody could have a different grade in the group depending on how the peer assessment goes. I will also say, as far as team dynamics, sometimes it's rough and people are not responding. And sometimes you have to give them an opportunity to succeed. If they have not shown that they're capable of succeeding, you have to provide them with a small part of the assignment, such that if that falls through, then it can be covered and the group won't suffer. That's just my suggestion. Now, groups will manage their affairs any way that they see fit. But if this is the situation, you want to make sure that you keep the entire group in the loop. That way they can't go back complaining, saying that they were frozen out of the project. All right. You also want to make sure that this project is indeed a group project, that we have approximately 5 people per group. And you want to make sure that it is a group of 5 people and not 5 individuals submitting to a group paper. There's a big difference between the two. What do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that when you give a presentation, sometimes it's very obvious to see who did what, right? Because you divvy up the work, and this person did the marketing, this person did the product, this person can do the promotion, and we do different parts, table of contents, what have you. So you divvy up the work, and that's fine, but you want to make sure that in the end, everybody has an idea of what the entire project is. That everybody in that group can answer a question that is presented or that is asked of the group. What typically happens is someone asked about a product, or they ask something about the product, and the whole group looks at one person because they did that part. Well, you don't really want to have a situation where you have to rely on one person to give the answer. So make sure everybody has a general idea. Before the presentation, talk over it as a team. And sometimes you can even, and I hope you'll do this, you'll do a rehearsal. You'll do a dry run, and that way everybody has an idea of what is going to be presented. There are no surprises. There's nobody speaking out of turn. There's nobody going too long, because there is a limited amount of time for this. All right. So this was the preliminary analysis, and if you have gotten through that, you would be 2/3 done with the project. This is the full outline, which includes the table of contents. Make sure you have a table of contents that's functional. Don't have a table of contents with no page numbers, and don't have a table of contents with page numbers but no page numbers at the bottom of the page. I've had that before. I get a nice table of contents but no page numbers. I get a nice table of contents and no page numbers by the labels. So you want to make sure that you have the table of contents in good order, and that all the labels coincide with the page numbers that are listed in that table of contents. You don't want somebody going looking for social cultural environment and it says page 5 and they go to page 5 and it's not there. You want to make sure that that's all taken care of. There are ways to generate a table of contents in Microsoft Word, and it's a very useful skill to have, if you're doing documents, and because we make mistakes, and sometimes when you make changes to a document, everything shifts, and now you have to change all the page numbers. If you generate a table of contents and you make say you make 100 changes, 200 changes, all you have to do is regenerate the table of contents, and all the page numbers will coincide with the labels that you're identifying. So you have an executive summary. All the other things were from the preliminary analysis. Situational analysis is you're talking about who you are, what you're doing, what you're promoting, and you'll also talk a little bit about the market that you're in, the competition, how large it is, the market share, the dynamics, the different types of companies, and why you have a value proposition that is comparable to what they have or better than what they have. Basic need potential. How did you determine that this market wanted or needed this product? You have to have some kind of rationale, some kind of data. You talked to someone, you saw an article, you read a report. something that showed that there was an expressed need for this product. And then part 3 is what the 4 P's will be on during your presentation. So you would talk about your product or product line. You'll talk about your pricing methods. You'll talk about distribution, how that product will get to the customer. Will you have a sales office? Will you use distributors? Will you use an intermediary? Will you have a factory over there? How are you going to source your inputs? Or are you going to make it in the United States and export it? Or will you decide to use some other way of distributing your product? Then you have marketing strategy. This is where your creativity comes in. You will come up with an ad theme, something that will promote your product, that will make it memorable, and that will establish a brand presence. And that part 3 section is going to constitute what we know of as the marketing mix. The export financial plan is essentially a forecast. These numbers, of course, aren't real, but of course, when you're forecasting, those numbers aren't real either. Those are just projections. So what you would do is a few documents showing some kind of projection in terms of what type of financial situation that you're looking going forward in this business. These documents will be denominated in U.S. dollars, so make sure you figure you make that kind of calculation. And also, what's important is the break even. Now, break even, I believe, is done in managerial accounting, and you should kind of have an idea of how break even is done. There are many different ways to do it. Most of the groups will have a chart, and then they will have the break-even point in revenue and in units. Again, it's very easy to do, and some will actually explain what the break-even is. So I'm leaving that to you to determine how you want to express it. But I think that at this point, everyone should have an idea of how a break-even analysis is done. Lastly, this is the presentation criteria. So when you present this product, I'll be looking at 5 things. I'll be looking at content. That is, content meaning the type of content that you bring in the presentation. Was it thorough? Was it well researched? Was it glossed over? Were there mistakes? Were there factual mistakes? Were there inconsistencies between the speakers? All of these things are important, because if you are in a professional environment, you want to be consistent. You don't want to have any contradiction if you're a group in front of a client, because they will see it and they will nail you to the wall if that should happen. So make sure your content is consistent. Make sure that you compare notes and that you're not saying different things in front of the class. Creativity. Was the presentation captivating and demonstrate imagination? SBI has some very talented students, very creative students. Some of the students will ultimately switch industries and become creative artists. That has happened a great number of times, but this is your chance to express your creativity. You can be creative in terms of your slides. You can be creative in terms of how you have adapted the product. You can be creative in terms of how you present it. And you want to, most of all, not only be creative, but you want to be believable. You want to have credibility when you present, because that's the whole thing. When you're developing brand awareness, is you want to be credible. You want people to trust you. So with creativity, you want also to ensure that you gain a deal of trust. And I think with trust, people can kind of understand where you're going. Organization was the, or did the presentation appear to be well organized and rehearsed? So all I will say to that is make sure that you rehearse, you go through it, so that there are no surprises and there are no long pauses. There's no one tripping over someone else, and that it is clear and it is streamlined, and that you have a nice, you have a good presentation. Your delivery, were speakers clear? Make sure you project your voice, that you breathe through your diaphragm and out, and that you make sure you have good posture. Your hands should not be in your pockets. If you're using cell phones, if you're using cue cards, make sure you're not reading from them, because cue cards essentially are for cues, right? You look at something, it gives you a cue, then you speak off of it. It's the same with slides. You have a PowerPoint slide, you don't read from it, you basically use it as a cue to speak off the bullet, and then you project it to the audience. If there are mistakes made, just relax and think about your last point, and then try to pick up your memory if you lose your train of thought. Visual aids. Your PowerPoint slide should be a professional grade presentation, meaning no mistakes. Make sure there's contrast in the background, that if you have a dark background, you have light letters. If you have a light background, you have dark letters. If you have a textured background, which means that you have a design somewhere, make sure that the text can be read over the textured background, so that we're not losing any information that may be presented, on the slide. I think SBI students have done a lot of presentations, and you have probably heard this several times, but it is important to ensure that you don't have those types of mistakes. In terms of your presentation, you're going to focus on the product. You're going to focus on what you did with the product, how you adapted it. You're going to give us some ideas of the promotion. Again, you can use a video that you've made. You can do a skit. You can show us a billboard. You can do a radio spot. You can show us a website. Anything that will help make your point. But also know that if you're doing translations in languages, and if you're speaking in other languages, make sure the translation works. Never know who's in the audience. Someone may speak the language and they'll say, oh, well, that's not the right translation. But again, I think this typically goes over quite well. All right. So your reference point, the last 3 chapters that we've done, entry strategies, the entry strategies, and the actual marketing that you're going to be doing, chapters 13 and 14 will give you some insight as to how to go about your marketing strategy. So you might want to take a look at those 2 chapters. And lastly, the guidelines are the presentation are 10 to 12 minutes. You shouldn't be less than 5 minutes with 5 people in the group. Avoid adding special features at the last minute. Now, we had our last journal presentation. That was Thursday. And a number of people did PowerPoint presentations for their journal article. And of course, I was not aware that these were going to be done, and it's fine. But what typically happens is when you have something like that, it adds a little bit of time to the setup, the whole setup process. So if you have something that you're doing that's extra, make sure that you let me know, so that way we can queue up, and you won't have to open up your Gmail and get slides and load them up and all the other things that takes a lot of time to do. and then time just melts away. We run out of time, as we did in one of our classes for the journals. Professional attire is required. Typically that would mean form attire, and which is easy for us because we know what form attire is, and you typically will be wearing it every week. So that should not be a difficult requirement to meet. Again, bullet 3, focus on presenting the attributes of the product. Notice explanation of financial statements are not needed. You don't need to go over those financial statements or break even or cash flow or income statement. You don't need to do that. What we will want to see are your props, your mock-ups, anything that you want to show us to give us an idea of how your idea will fit, whether it be the packaging, whether it be the label, the name, the color. You can also pass out samples if you'd like. That is perfectly acceptable. If you're bringing something to eat, make sure that you clean up, and that we're not, preferably you would do that at the end of your presentation while we're waiting on the other group to set up. All right, well, that should do it. As I said, skits are fine, and each member who is presenting in the group should have a role to play, meaning that you're not just standing up there looking around. Now, if you have not done anything in the group, you want to make sure that you're doing something, whether it's manning the keyboard, holding a sign, doing something. And typically when students have not done much and they start presenting, you can tell because they get long. They're trying to catch up. They're trying to hit a home run because they're trying to impress their group members and kind of encourage them not to give them a low peer score. But you want to make sure you're doing something, that everybody is balanced, that when you're standing in front of the classroom, you're balanced, that everybody's looking in the same direction. They're looking toward the person that's speaking, or looking toward the center, or looking out. You don't want people looking in different directions, or you don't want someone looking off to the side with their hands in their pockets. You want to be professional, and you want to command the room. You want to project yourselves to the audience. The final papers I do the day of the presentation. So I don't want to hear people coming up after saying, well, we have to go get it bound. There's a page missing. I left my section on my thumb drive. My hard drive crashed. There's a such thing as redundancy. So you want to have several copies of everything. Everybody should have a copy on their thumb drive, or on their computer, or on their Gmail. So that way, if we have a situation that we have redundancy, and then we will save the day when those accidents happen. So for the upcoming presentations, I want to give the lineup for 2 o'clock Tuesday. We have Rwanda, Thailand, Brazil, and Jamaica. That's for the 2 o'clock class. For the 3:30 class, we have Croatia, Grenada, Honduras, and the United Arab Emirates. Those are all the presentations on Tuesday. On Thursday, we will also have 4 presentations. For the 2 o'clock class, we will have Iceland, Jordan, Vanuatu, Costa Rica. For the 3:30 class, we have 4 presentations: Mongolia, Brazil, Morocco, and Fiji. Those are the lineups for the 2 days. And again, the presentations have been outlined in the guidelines that I have given you. So that's the lineup for both classes. We have some very interesting countries, very diverse. and hopefully we will learn a lot in the process. Last point, the final exam will be chapters 12 through 14, and it will include questions from the presentation. So you have to be present in order to get some of the details of the presentation. I will have the papers graded for the final exam. Our final exams will be held on Friday, unfortunately. And I will have the graded papers that you can look at, and you can get an idea of my feedback. And of course the grades will also be in the paper. Okay, hopefully that helps. Some of you are probably meeting this weekend, and you have also Monday, and make sure you watch this video so you can be clear on what I'm looking for. And I'm looking forward to the presentations. I always learn a lot from these presentations about the countries, and it gives me some ideas about other countries that I may want to visit at some point. And hopefully you'll get the as much enjoyment out of these presentations as I will. All right, so make sure that you come prepared. Also, email me if there's any kind of updates in terms of your group. Any other questions that you may have concerning equipment or other things that may be needed. Also note that I will not have an Apple plug. So if you are using an Apple device and you have your laptop, I will not have an Apple connection. So you'll have to have that, and I won't know how to connect it. So you'll have to bring your own equipment if it's something other than what we're using at that kiosk in the classroom. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'm looking forward to the presentations, and I'll see you Tuesday. Bye.